Welcome to Revolutionary Optimism. Issues like economic hardship, political violence, and the rise of authoritarianism have left many Americans feeling more despair than ever. Fortunately, physician, humanitarian, and social justice advocate Dr. Paul Zeitz has identified revolutionary optimism as a new cure for that hopelessness and cynicism. Once you commit yourself as a revolutionary optimist, you can bravely unleash your personal power, #unify with others, and accelerate action for repair, justice, and peace. On this podcast, Dr. Zeitz is working to provide you with perspectives from leaders on their strategies for overcoming adversity and driving forward revolutionary transformation with optimism. In this episode, Dr. Zeitz is talking with Scot Nakagawa. Scot Nakagawa is co-founder and executive director of the 22nd Century Initiative, a pro-democracy national action network that is building a movement to resist authoritarianism and preserve the possibility of a more democratic future in the United States. He's the author of the Anti-Authoritarian Playbook on Substack, a widely read resource for pro-democracy activists. Since 1988, Scot has been on the front lines of the fight against white Christian nationalism, working with organizations including the Coalition for Human Dignity, the National Anti-Klan Network, the National LGBTQ Task Force, and the Highlander Research and Education Center. For nearly 4 decades, he has led campaigns to limit the power and influence of racist, anti-Semitic, patriarchal, and religious fundamentalist movements. Here's your host, Dr. Paul Zeitz.
Hey, Scott. Welcome to the Revolutionary Optimism podcast. It's a great honor for us to have you here today, and we look forward to learning from you.
Well, thank you for having me. I consider it an honor to be included.
So we met a few years ago when I was newly becoming a democracy activist, and I was really struck by your lived experience in fighting authoritarianism and white Christian nationalism out in Oregon, I think it is. So I would love for you to tell us your personal story, like what makes you tick inside, where is the fire coming from that drives your clarity of purpose right now in these times that we're living in. We're going to come to these times in a minute, but let's just start with the past.
Okay, well, the past is easy, much easier than the future to understand the past. But, I grew up in Hawaii on a sugar plantation at a time when it was still an active sugar plantation. My high school yearbook each year ended with a note from the sugar boss welcoming us to field and factory. But the plantation camp I grew up in, with family members was one in which, many people who had been involved in a huge anti-authoritarian campaign in Hawaii, they and their ancestors were there. My grandparents, for example, participated in that fight. And basically what it is that Hawaii missionaries in Hawaii that came from the U.S. Continent pivoted to becoming businessmen way back when and established the great sugar and pineapple plantations that many people who've been to Hawaii have seen. And those were the core of the Hawaiian economy at the time. And the way that they staffed the work was by using something called the Masters and Servants Act, if you can wrap your head around that, to import labor from Asia, first China, then Japan, then Korea, and the Philippines. And, in each of those waves, the people who came were disenfranchised. They lived in plantation camp housing and really had no direct route to political power. But they were workers and they had worker power. And when World War II happened, and the Masters and Servants Act got closed, they could no longer replace the workers they had with new recruits from Asia. And so they got unionized with the IWU, and they launched the first successful agricultural workers strike in the history of the United States. That strike took down, or at least for that time, brought to its knees an explicit white supremacist oligarchy that ruled the islands that was based, again, explicitly on Jim Crow. And so this is a huge endeavor that they undertook. And that story, resonates within my family and within my experience growing up in Hawaii. But, I moved to Oregon on the continental United States way back in the 80s. And back then, toward the late 80s, in 1988 in particular, a young man named Mulugeta Sarah, who was an Ethiopian immigrant to Portland, was murdered by neo-Nazi skinheads. He was really brutally beaten with baseball bats and kicked to death. on the streets of Portland. And what happened right after that really horrific incident was that hate crime statistics in Oregon started to go up.
Really?
So this was a phenomena I had not anticipated. I thought people would react with horror to what happened, and that hate crime statistics would actually be, go down because of greater law enforcement scrutiny of the situation.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened, and it bucks the national trends up until that time.
Yeah.
So we got organized and formed something called the Coalition for Human Dignity to start doing research into what was going on. And what we found was that there were organized white nationalist groups all over the state of Oregon, and many in the city of Portland, who were at that point right on the cusp of being explicitly a white supremacist movement and trying to turn in the direction of white nationalism. And so less ideology than nation building, in other words. So, we tracked that and followed it, and it seemed to be growing, and that concerned me. But then what I ran into around the same time was the rise of the Christian right. And that particularly did trouble me. As I started to study it and learn about it, I recognized that this was a force that could grow powerful enough to take down our government, and became very concerned about it. So, I was alerted to take action around, the mid to early 90s on this question, as there were many other people, including my co-founder, the co-founder of the 22nd Century Initiative, Irv Shivad, who was one of the most prolific activists of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, a really remarkable person whose vision of what might happen, the prediction of this moment, actually is published in a book she wrote called Virtual Reality, that was published in 1996, I believe. But anyway, so that's how I got to this point. I started being an activist in the 70s, and mostly what I was an activist, was organizing communities to try to leverage resources for us to be able to develop the communities politically and economically. Mm-hmm. And that all switched as I started to see this other looming problem.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that deep history of your family and the sourcing of the energy for fighting for justice. Was very lived experience and personal, and of course, your whole journey was shaped by that. It sounds like, and the work that you did in Oregon, yeah, was obviously an early warning of what we're experiencing now. So I think for my listeners, it would be really helpful if you could help us make sense of what you think is happening right now, and give us a sense of the threat that we're facing with this authoritarian project. We've talked about it in other episodes, but I do think your perspective would be, I want you to really give us a full understanding of the definitions that you use and how you came to this analysis that you have.
Authoritarians take over in stages, right? This is well documented by political scientists. The first stage is preparation. And if you'll recall Project 2025, the document created by the Heritage Foundation, that was widely circulated and commented upon in the lead up to the last election, that's an artifact of that preparation process of identifying which institutions to target, which strategies to move, what actions to take in order to be able to consolidate authoritarian control across society. So they did that planning. And then the next phase is breakthrough, which is what the last election was for the authoritarians. Trump's victory there represents a great breakthrough because it allowed them to capture the White House. And once in the White House, he started to implement Project 2025. It's about halfway through at this point. But, the Project 2025 implementation is the process of authoritarian consolidation. And that's where we are now. We're in the midst of that process. Those same political scientists tell us that we have maybe 12 to 18 months from the time of authoritarians break through until full consolidation is achieved. It's looking like it might take longer than that here in the United States. The window of opportunity is still open, but we should also keep in mind that Trump is moving at light speed at trying to accomplish his goals. There's a new version of Project 2025 out. It's not officially Project 2026, but it basically describes the next phase. And that's something that we should all be looking at and thinking about very carefully, because it helps create a blueprint for us in terms of where we should be and what we need to do in order to prevent consolidation from happening. Now, because we call this revolutionary optimism, I want to be really clear that there is reason for hope here. The United States has advantages other nations don't have, right? And so one of them is we have a very robust, well-networked, and well-funded civil society. So we have the infrastructure for action to take place at scale to be able to confront this problem.
Yeah.
The other is that we still have independent media. It is collapsing under the pressure of authoritarianism, but we still have actual real life critical reporting on what the administration is doing. And we have a independent judiciary, or at least not fully, the power hasn't fully been consolidated across the judiciary, which is why we're seeing the kind of things that we're seeing now in terms of Trump's lawsuits being thrown out of court and whatnot. That's an indication of that kind of independence. And then the last thing, it may be counterintuitive to many of us, or at least not obvious, because we're kind of the goldfish in the aquarium, but federalism is another real advantage that we have. In order to consolidate power across society, the administration needs to be able to take over 50 states and literally thousands of jurisdictions at the municipal and county level across the country. Full authoritarian control is not consolidated until that happens. And so that gives us some room to fight, because under our federal system, the states and jurisdictions under the states have that kind of room to fight. And people are using it. We saw that happen in Minnesota, for example, where they very successfully were able to win that very critical battle against against ICE and immigration enforcement. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Yeah, so that's I'm really interested about that. The way that you define the authoritarian breakthrough at the 2024 election. Some people I've talked to have said this breakthrough actually happened when he was first elected in 2016. And then, I think the attempt to capture the election of 2020, your federalism point is actually really important, because it was the states, including Republican-controlled states, that pushed back against his attempt at capturing that election. We do have that system that is in place now. So, through the states controlling the elections, makes it very hard for the federal government. Now, of course, he's got ways that he could do it differently now. We're in the second phase. We're in the accelerated breakthrough phase for sure. So I think we agree on that. Now, we're in the midterm election cycle. It's April of 2026. We have about 7 months until the midterm elections. Can you help us anticipate what you're anticipating, or what you think we should all be preparing to anticipate that might happen this year in the authoritarian consolidation that you mentioned?
Well, the disenfranchisement of voters is key to their strategy. That's why we are seeing birthright citizenship contested at the Supreme Court, and why we see another case is challenging what's left of the Voting Rights Act. The election is a really critical turning point for us. We should view it as a trigger moment, an opportunity to be able to mobilize people taking advantage of the infrastructure of elections in order for them to be able to participate directly in deciding what the future looks like for us, right? A supermajority of people at this point, I believe, want a more democratic future. They want a secular government. They want, to have the ability to participate and the right to protest. And so that's a really good sign for us. When I was saying what our advantages are, I failed to mention when authoritarians break through, they normally have very high approval ratings, like 80% or more when they break through elections.
Oh, wow.
Trump has never had such high numbers and certainly doesn't have them now, and the numbers are going down. So that's a big, big advantage for us.
Right.
So we need to make that really clear to people. We need to demonstrate it. We need to illustrate it in the lead up to this election, that we are most of the American people, right, who stand in opposition to this kind of cruelty and greed, incompetence and corruption, right?
Yeah, so I want to ask you about this because I personally am a registered independent. And as you probably know, the majority of eligible voters now are also identifying as independent, hemorrhaging from both parties. Yeah, it's not an organized political force. So
Uh-huh.
my whole life, it's always been, accepting the notion of lesser of two evils. We'll
Hmm.
just go, we'll go this way because it's better. It's more or less bad than the other option. But the younger generation, Gen Z and millennials, they're tired of that. They don't want to just succumb to that. So when you talk about a supermajority, I kind of agree that there is a cross-partisan supermajority that wants to fix our democracy, but they recognize that it's broken. And while everyone says it's the election, there, as you know, very limited participation. Like in the last election, 90 million eligible voters didn't even participate. So,
Hmm.
like, there is just this sense of why vote? It doesn't matter. It's not going to change the broken system. So, what do you say to that?
Well, I mean, there are key demographics that did not turn out in the last election. Voter turnout was very low among them, including younger people. And we need to turn that around. I think that what we need to do is to turn this election into a referendum on authoritarianism,
Good.
or put another way, into a referendum on freedom, right?
Mm.
Very specifically, what we're doing at 22nd Century Initiative is two things. One is that we're beginning to gather together people to get them ready to engage in a messaging campaign around making sure every vote gets counted, because we do anticipate that there will be shenanigans. I mean, that's been pretty much telecasted by the administration pretty clearly. But there's also the possibility of a state of emergency being called, for instance, or of a coup, even, in the wake of a defeat. And so these are things that we need to anticipate and be prepared for. And so what we want to do is just flood the zone with people saying over and over and over again, count every vote,
Mm.
and keep people's eyes trained on what's happening and prepare for the possibility of the need to mobilize. The second is something we call alegría, which is taken from the Chilean No campaign that ousted Pinochet from power. It's alegría, joy is coming. So right up your alley,
Yes.
Paul.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
And
Joy is
it's an arts
resistance,
and
as you say in your recent blog.
yes, yes. But it's an arts and culture offensive that we are mounting to basically mobilize people in the arts and culture world and join them with activists in order to be able to create a kind of cultural context to compete for the cultural landscape,
Yes.
leading into the election, to kind of ignite people's imaginations and lift their spirits and get them feeling like movement's the coolest place to be because the coolest people are there doing really cool shit.
Yeah, exactly. We have to make it fun. And like you said, there's a loneliness pandemic, and the opportunity that we all have in creating a supermajority cross-partisan movement is to make it fun and make it an enterprise of joy, to rebuild our democracy. I mean, that's kind of, I think we're very much aligned on that. I really loved your recent paper, The Ideological Traffic Jam. um, and the river that can break it. I mean, this is like really putting into words something that I have a sense of. And, I would love for you to share the analysis that explains it, and the river stream metaphor, because it's so alive in me. And I'm
Mhm.
actually living my life with the understanding of myself as a stream and a river, or the intermix of the
Uh-huh.
confluence of all that. It's really beautiful, so please share that.
All right. Well, thank you. First of all, your reaction that you felt like something got put into words that you already understood seems to be broadly held, right? And so, I mean, when you're obsessed like me, you actually pay attention to these things and put them down on paper and take notes and keep your notes over years and years. So you have things to draw on, but I think that intuitively people understand where we need to go here. And so, basically it begins with the acknowledgement that we're in a kind of an ideological traffic jam. For the eggheads in the room, people who like to study philosophy like me, it's an epistemological crisis or a crisis of meaning making. And we live in a really fragmented society that has been, exposed to extreme top-down pressure over a really long period of time. And it's basically caused us to crack, to shatter, into many pieces. And then what's encouraged that further is the development of the internet, the deregulation of media that has now caused people to seek their news in a variety of different places, often quite unvetted, that are giving them really diverse kinds of evidence for why things they're witnessing in the world is happening. And many of them are saying it's because of those people or those people or those people, ordinary people like you, but that's not of your tribe, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's basically caused what we're describing as an ideological traffic jam, as I said, one where, the cars are stuck on the road and they're starting to get road rage. And at a certain point, that road rage starts to become lone wolf actors acting out violently, but also can amount to people basically deciding that the authoritarians in control should just get out a bulldozer and bulldoze some of those cars off the road to get them out of the way. And of course, that would be them, not us, right? Those we disagree with. And so that's a crisis. That's this kind of situation that we find ourselves in. And efforts to try to...
Before you go on, this is an important point. Do you believe that the Trump populist messaging, was a people were attracted to his disruption message and because of what you just said, because of the ideological traffic jam. And
yes,
I really felt like that might have been the case in the first time he got elected in 2016. It was like, oh my God, more of the same Clinton stuff. Like we were all so sick of all the scandals, and then here it comes again.
Yeah.
And then, oh my God, so this alternative, not that they necessarily liked him for everything he says or does, but he's definitely a disruptor.
Yeah. Well, and you notice that word disruptor is used a lot, right? People describe themselves as disruptors when they're sense makers, because in order to be involved in sense making, you have to be disruptive because we are in a traffic jam, right?
Right.
And so first you got to get people's attention.
Right.
But, it's a dangerous situation, and one that is, further facilitated by the fact that, of course, as described in that book, The Big Sort, I can't remember the author's name, but we have voluntarily basically segregated ourselves into ideologically homogenous little units in society.
Right.
And so all of those things inform this problem. What the solution that's being offered by many who are trying to build big tent coalitions is to just get people to stop for a moment and all decide to go in the same way to get off the road, right? We're saying we don't think that's possible, nor necessarily desirable, right? Pluralism is the foundational architecture of democracy. And pluralism means you need to be able to support the right to participate in society of people that you may profoundly disagree with, right? And because we want to live in a free country. If you want to live in a free country, protection for people can't be arbitrary. It must be guaranteed for everyone.
Right.
And we recognize that the reason why people get involved in politics in the first place is ideology. It's when your belief system runs up against reality and things don't add up that people become radicalized, right? Turn to other solutions than the ones that are just on the regular menu. We want to preserve that quality of, that leverage.
Yeah.
So the springs and rivers idea is simply this, that we're already arranged in kind of a springs formation, in that we each have our own springs, our tribes, our family, our communities that we work with and that believe in us and we believe in them, where you feel safe and share values and can strategize together and whatnot without feeling as if you're, fraternizing with the enemy, so to speak. And so we want people to tend to those springs, and we want them to build them, to make them more popular, stronger, to add more people who are like themselves to them, so that at critical trigger moments, moments of crisis when it is possible to turn the tide on authoritarians, those springs will then go into action to feed a shared mighty river, one big and broad enough that is not governable by authoritarians, right? And so, and that can engage in disruptive activities that actually undermine their power and drive defections from their key coalitions. So that's the idea. That needs infrastructure, right? It needs communications infrastructure, which is still being built. But the springs already exist. And so rather than try to get each of the springs to amalgamate into one river of one kind of neutral ideology that offends no one,
Right.
what we're saying is that we should let people be who they are. Be diverse, be ideologically diverse, be who you are, and bring that to the fight.
Yeah.
When the river forms, it's about the preservation of pluralism and the safety of society, right? Because if you're a real pluralist, you recognize that your responsibility in this situation is to protect every other spring.
Mm-hmm.
That has to be the responsibility of every spring, because you know that when anyone
even
of
those
them
you
is
disagree
attacked,
with, right? I mean, so
yes,
you have to. That's a big lift, but it's the right lift.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We believe so. I mean, the global record makes that really clear, right? That ideologically diverse coalitions are far more effective than those that tend to be more homogenous.
Right. So where do you think we are? Okay, so if the authoritarian breakthrough, say, was November of 2024, and we're now, oh my God, we're almost 18 months into that. Well, we're like 15 months, say, or 16 months from there. Where do you think we are? How do you think the movement of movements, the pro-democracy, this cross-partisan, ideologically diverse movement, I mean, this is how I'm spending all my time, actually, trying to weave that, that kind of movement. I know you are too. Many others are. How do you think we're doing? I mean, are we going to meet the moment? Because, the authoritarian project is like on steroids and moving really fast. All the resistance is happening. It's necessary, but it's kind of insufficient to slow the progress of the authoritarian. Maybe it is slowing it down, but it's not stopping it. The progress of the authoritarian project. So how is this convergence into a river to block authoritarianism? How's it going from your view?
I think it's going well. I mean, it might not always feel that way to people, but I think it's going well because you have to remember where we started from, right? I mean, this particular part of my career is 40 years of studying and talking about and trying to move people to take action on what is the rise of an authoritarian faction in American politics. By 2015, people were still telling me, I think you're overreacting and no one would ever elect that guy into office. And, I mean, the road to authoritarianism, my friend Nadine Block likes to say, is paved with people who are telling you that you're overreacting.
Right.
But within like a couple of years, by 2017, that was different, right? People had made a huge adjustment, which also required having to kind of do a kind of mea culpa of sorts, you know what I mean? Because they had to change positions.
Right.
And that's not easy to do. Then since then, now, but back then still people were saying authoritarianism. What's that word even mean? Well, we're well past that point with an unusually large number of people. So I think that all of that stuff is promising, right? The authoritarian regime is about halfway through Project 2025. So there's more that they need to do. So we've been doing a pretty good job at slowing them down. I also think, 8 million people perhaps mobilizing on the last No King's Day is a really good indication that we're achieving critical mass. Erica Chenoweth at Harvard, who's been researching these issues for a really long time now and who I consider a teacher, has come up with this figure, 3.5%. That it takes 3.5% of the public to engage in civil resistance in order for movements to topple dictators. And, that's a historical figure, not a silver bullet. But, so it could vary really greatly. And it also depends on what those people are doing, of course. But we're right up around that threshold. And so I think that's a really good marker of where things are. At this point, the movement needs to pivot a little because what we have now are demonstrations that are on a calendar and they don't have specific demands.
Yeah.
And so what we need to pivot to is something a little bit different than that. Think of protests as protest demonstrations as defense. Non-cooperation and disruption are offense, right? So we need to start to pivot in the direction of being able to engage in boycotts and strikes and other kinds of disruptive actions. Consider for a moment the Philippines. When Ferdinand Marcos stole the election from Corazon Aquino, what they did when they fought back was a number of different things that we need to be thinking about, including winning over the Catholic Church and causing defections from the military to happen. But also they organized a run on a state-owned bank. So that part of the coalition fell apart because they had no liquidity. They couldn't do business. And so that was part of what helped force him out of power, and that finally won the day for Corazon Aquino. We need to be thinking about actions of that kind. What can you do that actually knocks out particular pillars of support for authoritarian power and breaks up the ability of those authoritarians to form broad-reaching coalitions?
Yeah, so this episode is going to air right before May 1st, 2026. So I know I heard you speak recently about this shift from demonstration or maybe adding on non-cooperation. Like we need to build that muscle. We need to build that its power, really, for our pro-democracy movement. You know, the thing that I'm challenged by is that there's so many, even like on my social media feed today, there were like 10 different calls for strikes and boycotts, and I get overwhelmed. So like it's like I don't know, how do people sort through what they should do on that day? Even there's so many different messages coming out. Doesn't feel coherent to me right now.
Yeah, it doesn't feel very coherent. I think it's going to take a little while for that kind of coherence to come about. It would be very helpful if we had a single symbol that we rallied behind, that we had a anthem that was part of a songbook, but an anthem for the movement, that, all of these things that help us fight for the cultural landscape and also make the movement someplace that, like, you really want to be.
Yeah.
Because you feel that power, right? Like I'm a terrible singer, like you don't even wanna, but I sound great when I'm singing with like 200 people.
Right.
Right. And it just like that feeling we want. So, those things matter a great deal. We should be thinking about building out our capacity to act like a cultural movement, right? One that has a life of its own, that invites you in and makes you feel strong, powerful, and hopeful by being a part of it. And so, part of that's going to require us to lean into the stubborn refusal to quit.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You've probably been talking to people. I have been talking to people. I hear a lot of people saying they're exhausted or that they're scared. And those are totally legitimate reactions to be having. I'm not denigrating that. Right. But the third thing I hear a lot of from people is that this astonishing refusal to quit. They just won't quit, right? They're ready to just put it all on the line.
Right.
Of those three things, that's the one we need to lean into, and we need to normalize it. We need to make it be a thing that goes viral and that people start to adopt as a way of adopting a place in the movement. That I'm part of a movement that absolutely refuses to quit.
Yeah, we will not stand down. We will not tolerate this.
Yeah, so there are a lot of shifts that need to happen. But, the infrastructure is slowly being built. It takes time. I'm really glad that this event is happening on May Day. We need to be reaching out to labor because there's another set of statistics that Erica Chenoweth actually produced. It was communicated to me by Tarso Ramos, the former executive director of Political Research Associates, a place that if your listeners want to check it out, it's politicalresearch.org online. But the statistic is that if the administrative state moves to try to block an authoritarian takeover, they're less than 9% likely to do that, right? The chances of success are less than 9%. If a robust civil resistance movement comes together, the odds go more toward 50-50, right? So at least you have a role fighting chance. If labor, though, formal organized labor gets robustly involved, seriously involved in the movement, the chances can go up over 80%. And so it dramatically increases our odds. And it's because of something that everyone should know and tell themselves every day, which is that they can't govern without us, right? We are the ones who shop in their stores at 62% or something like that of the flow through our economy. We're the ones who work in their fulfillment centers and in their, all of it, right? We run the bureaucracies.
Yes.
So they can't really govern without us. And that is the clearest indication of why that labor number is so high.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. So I share your optimism. I mean, I do feel like, it's the headwinds of the news cycle and the velocity of the authoritarian project that is really creating this counter convergence, where the river is starting to form. You can kind of feel it and see it starting to happen, as you said, with the Node Kings, but also behind the scenes. I feel like there's the preparations for the upcoming election to try to make sure that they have integrity and legitimacy. It's possible that the authoritarian project could, capture the elections. They could, invoke the Insurrection Act. They could deploy military and ICE to polling stations. So that's where the red lines come in. And, that's when the people, then something has to snap, and we're getting ready, as you said.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you talked about Minneapolis, and I know that you had partners and stakeholders, and I don't know if you were personally involved in what was going on there, but what I felt like it was an example of all of your work over the decades and all those grassroots groups and all those community organizations that had been readied and were resilient and were not giving up. And then the circumstances occurred where they had to activate. And it was it was horrible and horrific that they had to, react to what the government was doing there, shooting citizens point blank. And this is unbelievable. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, something happened. Is that analysis right? And that would happen there. And do you think that that's what could happen nationally when we reach a red line?
Well, first of all, I have written about this subject, though I think I gave much too much credit to the people in Minneapolis. According to the people in Minneapolis, there's a statewide network in place. And Isaiah, which is the organization that did a lot of the coordination, it's not the only coordinating organization. So I'm actually having a conversation with people from Minnesota today to prepare them for perhaps a Substack live event or something where we can talk about what really went down. But the dynamics are right. On the point of the dynamics, it is correct. And but Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota in general, but Minneapolis in particular, went through something before the George Floyd murder that actually helped them to prepare. Right.
You
because the violence became so high, there was a need to mobilize, and so they had practice. And so that's the other thing when you were asking about, like, where are we now? These opportunities that are being created by these incredible organizations, the 5051 and Indivisible and, Mayday Strong and whatnot, amazing work that they're doing constitutes practice, right? It's both showing us this is how many you are, but also is a practice, how do of getting, mobilizing and acting collectively. And we'll get better at it because, before you go hand to hand, I'm saying theoretically, right? Because of course we know that nonviolent strategies are more than twice as effective as ones that involve violence. But before we get to that point, we need to get ready. And what's happening now is people are getting ready really fast. And those who want to get ready with them should go to, at this easy first step, freedomtrainers.net on the internet. And you can get, and you can just look it up and get free training there. And then another place, endpoliticalviolence.org, if you're concerned about political violence and want to try to figure out how to take the offensive and make it backfire.
Okay, last set of questions. You and I share the dream of having a future where we can rebuild a new democracy, or a better democracy. The folks that I'm working with under the Renew American Democracy strategy, we're aiming for a participatory, deliberative, egalitarian democracy, really rewriting the rules of the game to recreate a new form of democracy, more democratic, more authentically participatory than the world may have ever seen. So, and that's a dream, that's our vision. So, and you've written something about when movements topple authoritarianism, they can still fail if they don't have a plan for reconstruction and for recreating a new
Uh-huh.
form of government. So, what do you see, that phase looking like, and how would you
Mhm.
want it to emerge?
You're right that the difference between pro-democracy movements that are able to actually succeed at toppling dictators, the difference between those that then are able to govern over period of time afterward and those who don't, either because they govern democratically, I mean, either because they go in an authoritarian direction or because they are faced with, a backlash movement that pushes them out of power, is whether or not they had a plan. And so the stuff that you're talking about is great. It's very important. We need to be able to envision the future that we want in order to spark joy and longing for that future. But that also needs to be the kind of blueprint for, how to a big part of the blueprint of getting from here to there, right? The most immediate questions when you talk about that is, what do we do with law enforcement?
Mm,
What do we do with ICE and all the people who've been employed by it? What do we do about the army and the military in general if we're able to succeed at breaking through? And then further, what do we do with international trade?
mhm,
So there are big questions about the economy and how to democratize it, big questions about governance and how to maintain democratic governance that is non-authoritarian. All of these things are questions that are on the table for us, but and they need to be answered, and they need to be answered now. The process, we're trying to ignite a process of having that discussion, but the answers need to be being produced as we go along.
yeah, so that's a really important message that I want our listeners to hear, which is that while we're doing the resistance, while we're preparing to defend the election, all these really critical priorities, we also have the capacity, because we are an amazing country of dedicated people, to also start imagining and envisioning the new future. And that work is going on. I mean, I'm sure you may have heard that there was a new campaign that's being launched May 1st called the People's Bill of Rights 250. They're launching 10 national online deliberations to harness the wisdom of the American public about, like, what do they want our country to look like. And
Hmm.
so we want to, like you said, it's a cultural revolution. It's inviting people to actually participate and that their voice will actually
Uh-huh.
matter. That's the key thing, to bring legitimacy to what the people want and to bring political power to that. So do you have any thoughts about participatory democracy and there's a lot of citizens assemblies that are being planned at the local and state level in the United
Hmm.
States now. Have you studied those at all? Do you know anything about that kind of participatory democracy?
I haven't studied them very closely, but I know they're there, and I know what they are in concept. And I think that in concept, it's a very good idea. The movements that we build need to be prefigurative spaces to an extent. They need to actually be places where we practice the democracy we want in the future in order to develop that muscle and in order to normalize it. The movement also may become the last place where democratic ideas still live, right?
Mhm.
And so we have it's important for us to protect those ideas. And the best way to protect those ideas is to practice them. So all of the efforts to, engage people at the grassroots level make a big difference. And what they're about is less important than that people participate and that there's a pipeline between that kind of grassroots level entry point participation and the broader movement, right? The river that we talked about.
Yeah.
An example of this is Thailand. In Thailand, they've been having extraordinary electoral success, the pro-democracy movement there.
Mm,
And one of the bases of that is that they're working on clean water in the provinces
mm,
because there's almost no potable water coming out of the tap and water is expensive.
mm,
And so, is a big issue that everyone cares about. It's bipartisan or multi-partisan. because of a lack of clean water, one of the effects is that people don't trust local governments and the local water board.
Right.
So they're basically working with those institutions, getting people elected to them, and then making the what's inside transparent to the people outside, so that they can participate in making decisions about what to do in order to be able to resolve the problem. And they have actually managed to do that in 1 or 2 provinces where now there's clean water.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't stop there. Once people are engaged at that level, they're asked the question, what would it be like if this or this or this were also accountable to us?
Right.
And they build that pipeline into the movement that way. So I think all of it is good and all of it is important. It all super, super matters to us right now. And I would say to people, document everything. Keep it secure, but document everything, because in the future, what we learn in this moment might be very useful to us.
Well, thank you. And on behalf of ourselves, our children, and future generations, we are committing ourselves to do this work. We are not giving up. We are likely to succeed because there's so many of us who are so committed, and you are a leader in our movement. And I really just want to honor your immense work and all your thought leadership. I mean, your blogs they come out with a velocity that keeps us on our toes and make sure that we're keeping up with the latest analysis of what we need to be doing, because it's a very dynamic situation. So thanks for your sense-making leadership and your wise shepherding of the movement. I really appreciate you and all you do. So thank you very much. And thanks for being on the program.
Well, thank you for having me. And I mean, Paul, I think the world of what you're doing, I think it's very, very important. And I'm glad you're stoking joy out there.
Thank you so much. I was so honored to speak with Scot Nakagawa today, the co-founder of the 22nd Century Initiative. I've attended their conference and I've been part of their movement convenings, and I've learned so much from Scot over these years. But also today, hearing the story of his upbringing in Hawaii, fighting corporate overreach, and over to Oregon, where he fought against white Christian nationalism. And he has been a leader in our current pro-democracy movement, mobilizing grassroots groups across the ideological spectrum, cross-partisan movement building. And he really understands the moment that we're in. He calls it a authoritarian consolidation, which means that we have a limited amount of time to mount a counter response to prevent the authoritarian project from becoming entrenched. That is what's happening right now, and we're making good progress, and we're optimistic that we can prevent authoritarian consolidation. So thanks to the leaders like Scot and many others in his movement, we are on the path to victory here to prevent entrenched authoritarianism. Thank you, Scot. You undoubtedly are an amazing revolutionary optimist. Thank you for your optimism and your joy. He talks about joy being resistance, so let's go have some joy on the streets and prevent authoritarianism.
Are you ready to be part of the revolution? To learn more about building movements, please visit unify-usa.org. To get to know Dr. Zeitz, please visit drpaulzeitz.org. If you like this show, be sure to follow on YouTube or your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. Revolutionary Optimism, transforming the world one episode at a time.